Hello YouTube friends, welcome to Ask Joel. This week we've got a really good question that has a couple of different pieces to it that was asked by Deanne DeSouza. She says, is self-harm a sin and is it something we have to confess? Which is a really great question, especially if you maybe are wrestling with that particular issue or you know somebody who is and you're striving to live out the faith faithfully and you're wondering, well, am I doing something that is wrong? There's a sin I need to confess, or maybe somebody's asked you that question. And there's a couple places that we've got to go with this. And it's a really important answer, so I want you to follow me here. The first place we have to go is just addressing the reality of mental illness. Sometimes we struggle with things like depression, anxiety, or at its worst, thoughts of suicide and self-harm. And those things are all bigger issues that absolutely need to be addressed spiritually, but also need to be addressed emotionally, psychologically, and even sometimes physically through the help of a licensed therapist, counselor, or doctor, or sometimes all three. And so on the surface level, if you or somebody you know is struggling with self-harm, they're inflicting cuts on their skin, they're doing other things that are self-destructive, they're hurting themselves in some way that maybe you've noticed that's visible or they've disclosed that to you, the best thing that you can do is let a trusted adult know about that and then start to get help through a counselor, a licensed therapist, or a doctor. You were made for more than to be trapped inside mental illness, and the Lord has empowered people and given them gifts and talents in our world to help free you from that and learn how to manage that in a way that is healthy and allows you to be whole and ultimately to be free. So that's the first thing we really have to address before we even get into like the sinful aspect or what we do with confession, is that no person, or I guess very few people without some underlying mental struggle just simply say, I'm going to inflict harm upon myself. And so we need to address that underlying thing first and ask, why is that happening? And then get help to be able to deal with that. That's absolutely key. The specific question about it being a sin is, it's something that is good to confess, but is not something that we need to be guilt-ridden for. We have to understand a couple of things. One is that God created your body to be good, and God created you to love who you are. So anytime that we inflict harm upon ourselves, and let's just even draw back from physical harm, but emotional harm through the unkind things we might say to ourselves, through self-deprecating comments, through emotional harm we might inflict upon ourselves, and through physical harm, those are things that are kind of looking at God's creation and disrespecting it. And so we would say those are grave matter. They're things that are serious because they have a serious spiritual impact on us. That said, and this is important to hear, when we have an underlying thing like depression, mental illness, anxiety, if we're struggling with thoughts of suicide, those things, we don't have the same level of culpability for them. And when I say culpability, I mean we don't have the same level of control necessarily over some of those things, which is why it's so important to go see somebody who can help us regain that control. It doesn't make it less serious. Those are very serious things. And if we are doing harm to ourselves, that is a serious thing that we need to find someone to help us with as soon as we possibly can. And the reason why we might bring it up in the confessional is not so a priest could say, oh my gosh, what a horrible thing, I can't believe you're doing that, and condemn us, but so we can be honest with the mercy of Christ and say, this is an area where I'm struggling. I know it's not a good thing, and I know that it's coming from this other deeper thing that I'm wrestling with, but I want to overcome it. Because at the end of the day, things like mental illness, depression, anxiety, even thoughts that creep into our mind of suicide are not themselves sinful. And that's important. If you're wrestling with those things, that doesn't make it a sinful thing. When something becomes serious or even borders on sin is when it's something that is doing real harm to ourselves that we start to have the control to stop. And so if you're wrestling with that, I would say bring it to confession, but not for condemnation, but to give it to the light of Christ and the mercy of Christ and the grace of Christ, and then to allow Jesus to speak into that area in your life as you find other avenues of medicinal healing, counseling, therapy to be present alongside of what you need for spiritual growth, which is absolutely key anytime we're talking about mental illness or something as serious as this. So at the end of the day, what you need to know is self-harm a sin. It is a serious thing. Should you bring it to confession? Yes, not necessarily because we're seeking condemnation for it or to be told we're wrong, but to bring it to the light of Christ and to be honest that that's a struggle. And then we absolutely have to go find some help for somebody to counsel us through that so that we overcome that struggle and we can live as whole, free persons. If you've got a question, go ahead and leave it in the comments section below. We answer everything and anything here on Ask Joel, and make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can keep up with all of these answers, go back through ones you've liked, share them with a friend when the question comes up, and you just keep up with all the good stuff we're doing here, because we're going to see you back here next week for more questions, more of your questions on Ask Joel.